tell the property owner what needs to be installed. It's a good job. I like my work. I started in Marion County about 5-6 years ago. This is the third time I've lived east of the mountains. I'm not moving back. So I spent a lot of time in Redmond. I live in Crooked River Ranch now. I lived in LeGrand for a while, North Dakota, all over the place. But this is probably going to be my career the rest of my life. So, and I'm happy to do it. Let's see here. If I can figure out how to open. I'm not the greatest public speaker or presenter on these things, so bear with me. And again, I think Kevin addressed that. It's not, I don't want to do too in-depth on the presentation. I'd rather have it open for questions because it sounds like what you guys, and I'm sure there's lots and lots of questions. And I have a little more time than I think the folks who do this in Deschutes County, so I'm happy to do it. I don't know why this isn't working. There we go. Okay. So I guess the primary concern Kevin brought up to me is you guys have questions when we as regulators assign ATT systems to sites, and there's obviously no one quick answer to that. It's everything site specific. It really is, but there are definitely factors in this area, in any area, that are going to be a lot harder to approve a standard system or any other system than these ATTs. That being said, I just have a brief presentation again, and if you want to interrupt me, feel free to. I don't care at all. I'm not going to be reading the chat, so Kevin's going to monitor that. And if you have any questions, he'll stop, and I'll just go ahead and start. A little about me. Again, I've lived in Oregon most of my life, also in North Dakota, and like everybody else in Central Oregon, I'm from California too, and born in Redding. I didn't stay there too long. My parents got me out of there, so I got a degree in natural resources, which had a big hand in soil science, which got me into doing this. And I've had a lot of other jobs in my life. I got a CDL. I worked at the airport for quite a while. I also do building inspections for Jefferson County. I just got my electrical certification and should have my structural certification at the end of June. So it's good work. I like it. It's nice to be out and talking to people and helping address problems. Being, I guess, more on, I've also built homes and been on that side of it, so I definitely understand the frustration. We just set up our own bare land and develop bare land in Crooked River Ranch, and even knowing is what I thought, as much as I did about doing that, it was a struggle and a challenge at every level. So, you know, I feel for people trying to close their properties in time when they have septic problems. It creates a huge mess. I've been threatened with lawsuits, yelled at on the phone and swore at, and it's just part of my job. It doesn't bug me. People can yell at me all they want. That's I guess that's a government's job to take the blame for this stuff. But for those of you who don't know, I'll give you a basic overview of how a septic system works. And don't feel bad if you don't know, because I didn't know much about them either until I started doing this. I grew up on septic systems, but we never had any problems with them. But we were fortunate enough to I knew there was a tank, and I didn't really know what it did. But when you have, hang on. So when you have a septic system, you flush the toilet and run the sink, goes in, separates out into layers of oil and scum on top, sludge on the bottom. And the cleaner, you know, it's an anaerobic environment, and it's treated through an anaerobic process. It treats some of the wastewater, and liquid goes out the other side, generally to a drain field. Sometimes it's pumped out there, depending on the elevation. It's a pretty simple design. Septic tanks haven't changed much in decades. They just keep making them a little better. Most of them are concrete or really tough plastic now. And then it goes to a drain field. And, you know, that's part of the problem with this is, you know, even looking around for slides and information, there's not a lot of information septic systems on the internet that's helpful. And every state does it differently. So when you're finding information on it, it's often wrong or it's not legal in Oregon. So it can be tough as a homeowner, a realtor, anything to figure this stuff out. And that's why we're here. Deschutes County, Crook County, myself, anybody in the area should be happy to answer your questions when you have them.
Hey, Matt, were you wanting to share that? Do you have a slide there that you are sharing, or?
Yeah, is it not working?
Yeah, it's not sharing currently. If you want to.
Okay, hang on. Let me try again. Let me try it one more time.
I know it was working earlier. There, it's starting to come. Yep, now you're sharing.
Okay, there we go. Okay, I'll start. Oh, there we go. Let's try. It said it was. I thought it did. See. Not so good with technology. That was my goal when I went to college, to get a job that I never touched a computer again, but learned that's pretty much impossible at this point. So, Okay, let's try that again. So anyway, so this is what I was trying to show is how the septic system works. And yeah, the wastewater is separated out again. This toilet paper, anything that floats, oil stays on top, the sludge stays on the bottom. It is broken down over time. And the cleaner, clearer, just liquid comes out the other side into a drain field. And this is what I was saying. This is one of the best design, pictures I could find. I got my own pictures, but it's tough to really explain. This is a nice little diagram of what it really does. It goes into a distribution box, which helps separate it out a little better. Gets a little bit of the scum and just little bits of matter out of there. And if liquid goes to the drain field. It's dispersed in the soil over time. Bacteria in the soil, along with oxygen, help treat it. Water helps treat it, and in essence, it's cleaner than most sewage treatment plants on the other side. Your soil does a really good job of treating, depending on what you flush down the toilet anyway, and how their systems are treated. But it's a real, we've been using them forever, and it's a good thing to know with you guys, because I think the last I heard, about 35% of Central Oregon, if not more, is on a septic system. So it's a good majority of your customers out there that are on this type of system. And then the media that rests under the drain field is usually one of three types in Oregon. It's either rock and pipe, which is the gold standard, generally has the lowest rate of failure, the highest labor intensive to install. It takes at least a few guys. It may or may not be more expensive depending who you talk to, but should provide the most amount of actual media to treat the effluent. The trenches are required to be about 2 feet wide. Takes a lot of work though. The majority of systems now are not made of rock and pipe. They used to only be that way. Most, I think, at least in my experience, again, can't comment on everywhere, but most are made up of this easy flow stuff. And this is actually my property, and we did it ourselves. It went in pretty easy. I'd never actually done one on my own, so I get to say I've done one and do this job. So, but this is the styrofoam peanuts in the netting with fabric over the top. And this is really popular. It's really easy to install. It can be more expensive than rock and pipe. You only got 1 or 2 guys working on it. You can put it in a day, and it makes life quite a bit easier. Again, a lower rate of failure. It's been legal in Oregon for about 25 years. You don't see any systems that are really failing just because it's easy flow. But it works the same, a similar process. The peanuts, that we call them peanuts, kind of act like gravel. And they hold on to the effluent and make a little biomat, and the bacteria treats it, and then it leaves and goes into the soil. And then you have chambered systems. These are less common. They're really cheap. They also have a higher rate of failure than other systems. I don't know why, they just seem to. We do see a lot of repairs due to these type of systems. That they are by far the most cost-effective way to replace a drain field. They're just a half dome or sort of U-shaped plastic. They don't have any piping underneath. It just kind of fills up this void in the soil with effluent, and voila, you have a septic system. Generally, at least here, and I'll speak a little bit just on Jefferson County here, because this is what I usually see. We see a lot of capping fill systems, more than anything else, about as much as standard systems, but usually due to the depth of bedrock around here, along with a few other things, you have no room in the soil to put a drain field. So what you have to do is bring it up basically to the surface and cover the top with dirt. And that leaves a separation in between the rock and the bottom of the trench, and allows the soil to still work, and you're pushing stuff over the top to help with infiltration from rain and anything else. They're really common. They can be an alternative to ATTs, because if they're, not really an alternative. You have an ATT approval. More on that later, obviously. But sometimes there's a little bit of the rules that will allow you to put a cap instead. I'll explain that a little more if I can, but that's going to be really up to the local agents to make those determinations, which is why it is a little different county to county, even though we all use the same rule book. So I can only speak on what I see and kind of what I believe. They're really costly to do up front because they require a ton of dirt to put over the system. They require a lot of room to put in, And they can be a struggle at first because you're required to plant something over the top of them to keep them in place, because otherwise the dirt just erodes from the rain or the wind and you can have problems pretty quickly. You got to keep your animals off, they can dig holes or just walk all over it. So it takes a while, but once they're in there, they tend to last just as long as standard systems. And the reason I'm bringing them up is you see them a lot around here, but again, you can get away from ATT in some circumstances with a capping fill system. It depends on the depth you're finding the rock or the water table. In Chutes County, I know they have a higher water table down south in the county. We took a lot of soil classes at OSU Cascade, so we're all over the place. At least have a little idea what to expect if you guys are out there. They can blend into the landscape. Yeah, and it's one of the few systems that requires a separation between the trenches and a water table. Some of them don't. Standard systems, you can throw it right on where we find a water table or evidence of a water table in the soil. Sometimes, not always. So they tend to work pretty well. I'm actually not going to touch on that. You hardly ever see this around here. Down near the river, down near the Deschutes or the Crooked River, you might see this. When you get a lot of gravel bed, gravel in the soil, you basically have to have a pressurized system to disperse everything. Otherwise, it just leaks right through the gravel. And so you bring in more gravel and put a system like this on here, and there's little orifices in here that spray the effluent out. And so you have a big bed or long trenches full of gravel instead of a traditional drain field. They also require maintenance, but they can also be an answer aside from the ATT as well in certain locations. And again, I'll get to that later. And why we approve what we do is because it's all because of the soil. We have a pretty simple chart and the soil triangle, if you're familiar with that. We look at a few different aspects of the soil, and based on what it tells us is what we prescribe, so to speak, on any given property. And it is very different. That's why we ask when they dig test pits, you dig them 75, 100 feet apart, because the soil can really change that much just over a short distance. And which is why you probably get a lot of questions on, why do I have an ATT and my neighbor got a standard system? It can be just that simple. It could be the difference of 6 inches to a bed of rock or a water table or something like that. We look at the soil texture, the composition, color, and based on a couple books we use, it will tell us exactly what to do with your property. It's usually not a tough process. Some lots can be really difficult. I've worked at Marion County, there were 3 or 4 of us at one time. So you had a majority rule sometimes when you have a really tough site, which is nice. And I'm on my own here, so it's a little different. And I like working on my own better, but I do miss that element of, you're going to deny a system or prescribe a really expensive system on somebody's property. You want to be really sure you're doing the right thing. So it's nice to have a second opinion. And that's also what the DEQ is for, because if you are questioning it, if DEQ agents that work for the state will be happy to come meet you on site and take a look and kind of look at what you're doing. So we all work together in a way. We cover each other. I've worked for Crook County as well when they didn't have anybody. So and the depth to what you find is definitely the biggest issue around here, because you're going to find intrusive rocks and that stop the growth of roots, that can lead to clay pans at the bottom, and clay is just really thick clay that just doesn't allow any moisture to go through there. Sometimes that can be a problem, and you can't really put a drain field in that because simply it won't work. It'll fail and you have to start over anyway. It can get into the permanent water table. It can make a mess, and that's what we want to do. We don't, and just to be clear, we don't and shouldn't, in my opinion, ever take costs or timeliness of the installation or the availability of resources to do these projects when we're doing our evaluations. So we try to throw that out. I've heard people say it's like, well, they had a big fancy house, so they can afford an ATT. That's just easier. And that specific individual doesn't do this anymore. But it's frustrating to hear that, because that's not our job, in my opinion, as government agents. We should be there to offer advice in terms of interpreting the rules, and really that's about it. And that's really all we do. We aren't much more than that. And we can't really be. We don't design the systems. We don't consult. And there's more on that later too. And that's a good way to address these. There's a lot of people that do septic consulting, and they're really valuable resources because they are very expensive to use, but some of these guys charge $600 for a couple hours of time, and they can make a difference on your property. I got a list I can send out after class too of these guys. They, because they have ways, I guess you could say, to work around the rules or find little loopholes or just work within the rules with the homeowner and the regulator and find the best solution on a property. Generally can save people a lot of time and money if they, and what we get, and I'm not picking on anybody here because again, I didn't know much about this before, but you get a lot of people that move here from Portland or San Francisco and buy a vacation home, and they don't know anything about a well or a septic system, and that's not their job to do that. But they don't understand why they have to pay $40,000 for a septic system when all they've ever done before is just flush a toilet in their house. And it's a tough pill to swallow, and it sure makes a difference when people have a budget and they can't afford what they want to do. And that's where these guys can come in handy. And it doesn't always work, but when you get to know how they work, they can definitely work with us, and they like to argue with us, and that's fine. And that's their job, to kind of work for the customer, be on their side, the consultant anyway, and try to figure out the best course of action for any property if they don't like the approval that's given. And sometimes they are just stuck with it. But we determine it by a pit. If you see these around on properties, I'm sure you have. Basically, at least in Jefferson County, they dig until they hit the rock. So we don't usually have the depth in soil. In Deschutes County, you have a little more mosaic of soil down there, a lot better success in some areas, and some areas not. And the same here too. So we go all the way over to Camp Sherman, and really forested, thick soil over there. I think Jefferson County extends up to Old Alley Lake and all the way east past Ashwood. So there's a lot up here too, but mostly where we see people, you're going to see a lot of rock, and it's generally a pretty easy approval. Anything to about 18 inches or less is going to be an ATT. Unfortunately, it's just the way the rules work. Anything after 18, you can get away without an ATT if there's no water table. And there isn't much here. It doesn't rain much here. Everything drains through this rock pretty quickly. So in Marion County, that was what you would basically go find the water table because it rains too much over there, and you would see oxidized features in the soil. You'd find clues that would tell you the water table comes up here at a certain point in the year and drops back down, but you can't have a septic system in that. So that would be your limiting layer, or so you would call it. Even though the soil may work to treat the bacteria far below that, can't put a drain field in where water is going to literally make it float at certain times of year. So, and doesn't take us very long to do it. We're in the pit for 20 minutes or so. Again, I was just saying that the soil can vary widely, even lot to lot. In Deschutes County, I know you have higher water tables down south. You got bedrock content mostly everywhere else. There's river rock. It's a mosaic there too. It usually is. It's the kind of the fun part of our job. At least most of us like to get down to the soil and look at it. 20 minutes in the pit, we'll know, we can identify where the water table is, the depth of the effective soil, meaning the soil that can treat the effluent, and usually that's depth to any layer that doesn't allow it to. It's pretty basic determination that tells us where to set the trenches or have the trenches set during the installation. It tells us what type of system to issue. We do have denials. It doesn't happen very often, but there are lots we've denied that there are just simply no answer to, and that's it. And unfortunately, you can get it, it forces somebody to try to get an easement on another property for a drain field. It gets pretty ugly. We don't like to do that. And we don't it's just part of the job. It's not fun though, telling somebody, no, you can't build a home on your property, potentially forever, until something happens, or it can happen though. I don't know if it happens in other counties. I can't comment on that. I don't think I've had any here. We had a couple over in Marion County though. It wasn't fun. There's sometimes no way around that. I think I already went over this a little bit, but really between the texture, the structure, and the color, again, we have tables that we can translate to this. This was, sorry, you'll have to excuse me, it's part of an older slideshow I did. I tried to add to. I think I didn't mean to leave this page in here because I wanted to kind of make it a little easier to walk through on my end. But this is the soil triangle. We all adhere to this. So when you're actually physically sampling the soil, we don't do a perk test. We don't dump water in it. I don't anyway. I don't know if they do anywhere else, but most places around here don't. They're just different ways to look at it. And the texture of the soil will relate to the next chart. There's sand, silt, and clay. That's what soil is comprised of, I mean, along with other organic matter, roots, things like that. But most of it around here is going to fall in the loamy category. You get a little bit of sand, a little bit of everything kind of right in the middle here, a little bit of clay. And from this, what we see will come here to this table in the OARs. And this is really our bread and butter right here, because it's just how deep the soil is. And you find that and you go over to the texture, and this tells you how long your drain field is going to be. And you multiply this number by 3 roughly, because we size everything into a 4-bedroom house or less, or more, or less. That's right. So 4 is the minimum, and you can also, you 5, 6, 7-bedroom house. There's an answer for that too, but we don't do 1, 2, or 3-bedroom approval. It's just 4. It's the gold standard. It's 450 gallons max a day. That's what they rate that on. And so, if you're in a pit around here, you usually fall in this category. So you see a lot of 300 linear foot drain field approvals. It's pretty, honestly, it's a smaller size. It's usually pretty functional. You usually have enough room, and that even relates to a capping fill system too. You usually don't get much bigger than that around here. 450 is generally the largest you'll see, unless you get into real heavy clay. Sorry if I don't know if I'm explaining this the best I can, but it's I guess when you've seen this thing a million times, it is more simple to look at. But based again on the soil texture and the depth, this is what we do. And if it gets any shallower than the 18 inches is where you run into problems with ATTs. That's why it stops there. You have to have at least 18 inches of effective soil to have anything resembling a standard system. And so that's the question you guys have is, well, why do I have an ATT on my property? And I'm sure you guys get asked that a lot about the approvals. And they are really helpful. They're essentially, excuse me, I'm going to drink a coffee here. There's sewage treatment plants on your property. They have a big green box, so usually. That's the most common kind. And it goes after your septic tank, and they really clean the effluent up. And they come out very, very clean on the other side. They reduce the amount of bacteria, and they don't do a great job with the nitrates in the soil. The nitrogen, they don't, there's other ways to reduce that. They still have a problem with that in a lot of areas. That's just something they're not good at. The soil does the rest of the work there. There's sulfates, other agents in the sewage you don't want in your drinking water, you don't want in the soil. Generally, you would see these in an area with very little soil depth, very small lots, heavy clay, water tables, things like that. Those are about the 4 over here. Our whole rules are based on keeping water clean for every use in the state. It's not always that simple, but that's literally one of the first rules in our book. And I think I have it quoted later on. But it's usually pretty, right away when you're at a site. And if there's an ATT nearby, you're probably going to get one too. It's not always like that, but again, every lot can be a little different. And to get a standard system in the state of Oregon, you have to meet this section of criteria in the rules. This is the section here. This is our OAR. This is the section. This is the chapter, and then there are the paragraph sections here. And it's not a long rule book. The 071 rules are pretty. You don't need to know all of them for sure. Every time I open that rule book, I think I learn a little something new. But there's really only 5 or 6 chapters you'd look to. And it's not a bad idea to peruse that. You can get a copy from most of us. You can get one online. You can have it on your phone. I got a copy on my phone. You read through. It obviously takes a while to figure out what we're talking about in here, but you do have to have effective soil must be 30 inches or more below the ground, as shown in the table I was just showing you. And that's not quite to say. You can get away with 24 in certain circumstances, 18 inches sometimes. And again, I won't get into every little scenario, but if you don't meet these criteria with water levels, with separation to rock and things like that, you're not going to get a standard system. It doesn't mean you're going to move right to an ATT, but standard just means, you're digging a 24-inch or deeper trench, you're putting drain rock in there or drain media of some sort, and you're covering it up. It's gravity flow, and you never worry about it again, hopefully. That's what a standard system is described as, really. Even with a pump, it's still a standard system. And they're obviously the most cost effective. They're the cheapest because they're usually the easiest to put in, and it may require more material depending on the size of your drain field, but there's nothing special about it. It's just a tank, 1,000-gallon tank and a drain field, and you're good to go. And I don't have one on my property. I wish we did. We had a truck and a lot of dirt. But and again, that's what I just saying. If you don't have a standard system approval, generally you're going to get one of these. There's a couple other outliers, but rules can differ during repairs when you're looking at a pit than during a standard site evaluation, a general site evaluation on a brand new lot that's never been looked at before. It comes with a little bit of different criteria when you're talking about a repair. So when you have a failing system, some of these rules do go out the window, not all of them. And again, it depends on the agent doing the work. So you don't see a lot of pressure distribution around here again, but these are alternatives to standard systems. And number one being ATTs. It's generally the go-to. Unfortunately, here it's capping fill in Jefferson County. I understand it just shoots, it's probably ATTs, but ATTs can go in areas that other systems can't. That's, I guess, the good news if there is any. There's a few more good things about them. They can go right on the bedrock. They can go in areas with sensitive groundwater. They can go on really small lots. They take up a very small amount of room. They have different setbacks than standard systems, so you can put them closer to creeks and lakes and rivers. There's 5 or 6 different approved units. I mean, the DEQ has to approve the type that goes in the ground, and some people don't know that, and that's another thing to know. The most common one is an Orenco system. They're built in Oregon. They're very functional. They're very expensive, but they work. And they're widely available. I don't know about right now. Nothing's really widely available right now. Lots of resources are scarce, but in normal times. But there are 5 other ones that are approved for use, and most of them are a little more cost effective. They all do different things, but they all come with their different pros and cons. And again, this is just based on my experience. I don't install these. I don't have a lot of experience after, and that's where my job ends, and any of our job ends. Once we sign the final, the certificate of satisfactory completion, we're done. We don't do any regulation after they're in the ground. It's all on the homeowner and the installer after that to fix anything that goes wrong in the future, to maintain them. That's not us. So we don't know. We only see them again if they start failing. So I can't always comment on this or what people think, but that's just what I see. Yeah, again, they can have a small footprint. So they have, this is one setup here. This would be the pod on top of a plastic tank, and it through a series of pumps, it'll take a normal septic tank and fluent, pump it up through this ATT pod, which treats it through this specific one through a series of filters, and then depending on the unit, it can do that a couple times and recirculate, and then pump this out to a drain field. And when it gets out there, it's extremely clean water. It really is. I don't think you can drink it, but it looks different. It doesn't really have an odor if it's performing right anyway. And usually if you overload these things, the only way to really kill them off, they seem to last, at least I don't see a lot of failures with them. So I can say that. That's all I'll say. But it pumps to a drain field, and since the effluent is so treated already, it does require a drain field about the third of a size, whatever would normally be prescribed. So it does create a lot of space on your property to install these, because you get a lot of 1-acre lots around here, I've noticed, where people want a shop and a house and a driveway and a fire pit and everything else, and they have no room for their septic. So I've had people opt for these even over a standard system because the money wasn't an object, and they valued the room on the property, and that's just fine. This is an inside look at one. This is a different method of it. They have these sprayers that just distribute the effluent all over these filters. They are required to have a maintenance contract. That's sometimes the biggest problem for some people to swallow too, is paying somebody else to come maintain these things on their property for the life of these systems. So it's just another added expense. So again, the pros, the pods they're very, very, very space effective. Again, they can have drain fields as small as 105 linear feet. You can put the pod on top of the tank, and so you have a very small area that you have to dedicate to your septic, and the repair area, because you do have to have a repair area on your property at all times. We get a lot of vacation homes again that still want to park RVs and party on weekends. They don't want to deal with this. They see that, and so it can be good. Some people like the idea that somebody else is taking care of their system, so they don't have to ever worry about it. Some guy shows up, does the, the poop goes away is what we've heard. Flush the toilet goes away and I never have to worry about it again. That's worth, you can't put a price on that for some people. They are reliable. If you do overload them, they can have problems. But other than that, a couple side notes, I think I mentioned later in this too, that the liquid fabric softener, bleach, those are two Ridax. Don't put any of that in your system. It just creates huge problems with these things and standard septic systems. But the VRBOs, the ADUs and stuff in the area, those can create a problem because you get a 2-bedroom house and a VRBO and they have 8 bunk beds in there, and each one of them, you have 16 people that stay in on the weekend. That is a good way to overload your septic system. And you might have heard, I know the state's trying to push back on some of these in some way. I'm not going to comment on that. I don't know what they're going to do, but people that dump their RVs in there, stuff like that, it's not the best for the septic system. It can cause problems, but that's the only time you would see these overloaded, really. If it's a 4-bedroom house or a commercial facility, usually they just function as normal and make your life easier. Obviously, they're cons, and there's a lot of them, and they're very expensive, and that's the #1 complaint with these things, along with the maintenance contracts. Even though, and I've had this pointed out to me before, that city sewer is usually double the cost of most of these ATT contracts, which is kind of funny. But people don't want to move out of the country and pay a bill for their sewer. So some of them are noisy. Some of them work with fans to draw oxygen in, and some of them. I mean, most of them are probably unattractive. You have big green lids or black lids in your yard. You don't want to look at them. All of them use electricity, so it's tough for these off-the-grid parcels. We do a lot of approvals out in Three Rivers area, and there's a couple of these out there, but installers try anything they can do to get away from these things. As you're running off solar panels, you don't want to waste your power trying to feed your septic system, so it makes sense. They can be difficult installations. Usually when we prescribe these, they go in difficult lots. So they're either a really small lot or a lot with a lot of rock or a water table or close to a river. So that factors into these costs too. These guys have to spend a lot of extra work and time to get these things in the ground sometimes. It's not fun for us. We don't like issuing them unless we have to, because we have to monitor that's the only thing we do is make sure they are being maintained. We don't we dictate how they're done, but they are required to be maintained. So when they aren't maintained, we have to go after the homeowner and force them to get them back under compliance, and that's not always a fun thing to do. It's not easy. Most people don't want to do it. They just want to ignore it and hope it works. Not most, I shouldn't say that. Most people that don't keep up on their maintenance, that's what I meant to say. Most people do actually keep up on their maintenance because they're scared the system's going to fail. Maintenance sometimes, and this isn't everybody, I've heard that maintenance providers can be unreliable. There isn't a oligopoly of them out there. There's only a handful that do this. So you're relying on 1 or 2 people to come maintain your system. And if you don't like them, where else do you go? That's what I've heard. And I actually haven't heard that on this side of the mountain. It was on the other side of the mountain where it was tough to find people to actually come look at your system, maintain it, and provide a good service. It happens. Yeah, and again, but my neighbor has a standard system, and that's something I hear a lot. And there's no good answer to that, honestly. There's a little more into it than just that being that simple, and sometimes does work that way. You'll look at, we're about to do a subdivision here in the county on septic, and I'm pretty sure every lot's going to be a little different, and you're going to get these, and it does affect you. When you guys are selling these lots, I know it affects their value. Well, why can't this guy just bought the lot here with the standard system? Why should I pay the same price for this lot? And I got to put a $40,000 septic system in it, and that's a pretty good question. But again, it just is what it is sometimes, and the soil really is the underlying factor in all of this. And so back to what I was saying earlier, are there ways around them? Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes there isn't, but you can, depending on how busy someone is. If we have a bigger lot, if I have a 10-acre parcel and they dig 2 test pits and it's an ATT approval, I don't mind going to look at more pits. That's me, and trying to find an alternative to that, even if they have to pump it uphill and have a tougher drain field, at least to get it away from ATT. If I have the time to do that, there's nothing in the rules that says I can't do that. And that's not everybody. I don't know how flexible they would be in other areas. If there's an existing septic system on these lots, and a lot of people do this, Crooked River Ranch, I see this a lot. They will buy a lot with a single wide trailer, they'll tear it down and put a house up. And you have every right in the world to connect to that system. Anybody does. Whatever it's hooked to, the rule sits, and people are going to look this a little differently too. It's called an authorization to connect to this system. But if it's not failing, you have the right to connect to it. That's not the only rule. It has to also come with a couple other criteria, but you can try. And usually if it's that old, you're probably gonna have a metal tank you have to replace, but the drain field can be left alone. And you can at least, in most situations that I have found, a homeowner can just put a new home on there if it's 4 bedrooms or less and hook up and hope it works and deal with it later when it doesn't. It's much cheaper than, digging test pits, starting over with the system. I recommend anybody with a 30 or 40-year-old system would replace it, but they definitely don't have to. You can go after us or the DEQ and review our work or apply for a variance on these systems. And both those are costly, both with time and money. I don't know if my work's ever been challenged. I'm sure it has, but I don't think they let us know if it is. The variances take even longer. They can have success with them, but I don't think they'll let you do it without a consultant, and I'll get to that in a minute. There's also a rule, and it's called rural area consideration. I think I have that on the next page too. I'll get on that in a minute, but in certain areas around here, you're just not going to get away from it, and that's important to know. Anywhere with a sensitive groundwater area, I know Sun River and La Pine areas are really tough for these. I guess I don't know that. We talk to people in Deschutes County too, but I hear that. Camp Sherman in my area is really tough to find standard approvals due to the proximity to that river, which is one of the cleanest rivers on the planet. And keeping septic effluent out of there is of utmost importance. So and the soil is not cooperative near that river. You're going to get an ATT almost every time there. It's just the way it is. And there's no way to get it away from that river or out of the water table, and you're just stuck with it. And Terrebonne area, they're looking at a sewer system, which is a good idea because it's a bunch of very small lots with very difficult soil. But otherwise they have a lot of ATT approvals. Tumalo has a lot of ATT, same thing, small lots, tough soil. Consultants are helpful for you, homeowner, anybody, when you run into these really difficult installations. Again, I'm kind of bouncing around here. Sorry about that.
Matt, we have one question in the queue.
Sure.
They said question that they've heard different answers to is it okay to hook up an RV to your current septic?
You can in the DEQ rules. We recognize an RV as a legal dwelling, but if that becomes a planning and zoning issue based on what county or city you are in, usually it would take some sort of authorization process from us to say, yes, you can hook the RV up. You can hook a houseboat up. There's a bunch of things that are defined as dwelling, but it's a planning issue usually. You have to be zoned in an area that allows you to do that. So generally the answer is no, you can't unless it's a hardship dwelling. So that's more of a zoning and planning issue than a septic question, because in the DEQ world, you can hook anything to the septic. We'll find a size for it and we'll address the drain field and figure it out. You can have 10 septic systems on your property. There's nothing stopping you, but zoning issues are going to stop you from doing that because they don't want RV parks or something like whatever the reason. I can't really speculate on that, but that's not really in our realm. That definitely is it. Talk to the planning department when you have those questions, and they'll tell you what you can or cannot do based on how your property is zoned. So that's usually what it comes down to. And if you live in the city, some cities care if you dump RVs into their sewer or not. I mean, that's one, it has nothing to do with the septic, obviously. I see that a lot. I know I've lived places where they don't care at all and some where they really don't want you anywhere near that. So I guess it's the same with the septic system. It comes down to, I guess it's somebody else's job to determine that, not mine. But if it's allowed, yeah, we would just count it as a dwelling or a couple of bedrooms or whatever and move on. So, but if you are if you're in the county and you're usually zoned EFU or rangeland or recreation or something, rural residential, it has to be one of the, that's my verbiage here. This is out of the book. This is to be for rural area consideration, and you have a 10-acre parcel, it's a rule that not a lot of people would use. We don't really, advertise the rules, so you have to know this. But the parcel is at least 10 acres and doesn't have an accessible area approvable for a standard system, meaning you have a big piece of property and you still get an ATT, you can apply for this, and you can talk to your agent about using this section in the rules. It can't be 9.99 acres. We've had to do that before, but if it's not bigger than a 6-bedroom house, I believe is this sizing, and this is the key here. But you can put a system that's not standard on that property legally, even if you have an ATT approval. Not every agent is going to see it that way, because this rule right here requires the on-site system will not create a public health hazard or pollute public waters. That can be interpreted however you want to interpret that. So if you're in an area with really high groundwater and it's 10 acres, you're probably not going to get this approval or this consideration. But if it's something else, this can be an option away from an ATT. And that's, I'm not promoting that again. It's just what the rule says. Some people have used it in my past. We don't usually, in Marion County, here I'll make somebody apply for it and actually go down these steps so they do the rule, because ultimately it is the responsibility of the homeowner to see all this through. It's not mine, it's not the installers. They're responsible for the permit and the installation. They don't do it, you know what I mean? But it's their legal, they're the ones that are responsible for anything that happens on their property. So, but we don't have to allow it. If we think it's going to pollute public waters, then it'll be a no, because the ATTs do cleans the septic system up to the point it's no longer a real threat to the public water. So it's not always going to work. It's just something in this chapter that you can take a look at with your installer. If it were me, I'd usually require a consultant to go through this and find the best alternate method other than an ATT, and we have the right to do that. And this is the big one to me, and that's what I would stand on, is it's requiring strict compliance with the standards in this rule, meaning if you had to put a standard system in, it wouldn't work, or it's really hard to do. If it's unreasonable, burdensome, or impractical, then it's easier to get away from and find a happy medium, I guess is the best way to put it. You don't get an ATT, you're not going to get a standard system. What else can we do? And that's where a consultant, again, would come in. It depends on the agent how flexible in this rule they want to be. Depends on the lot. That's all I'll really say. But it is a nice tool to have in your back pocket. Again, yeah, 30 or 35% of Central Oregon is on septic. So you guys are going to run into this when you're selling property. And I'm sure most of you probably work in town, but if you're like me, I don't want to live in town anymore. This is a very big deal. So, and it's okay to challenge us. You can come in and argue with us. You can call us anytime. At least me, again, I can't speak for everybody. I don't mind taking calls anytime. If I have my phone on at home, I'll probably take the call. It's easier for all of us to sort this out before these problems arise when you're trying to close a sale. I know that, and that's thinking in your shoes for a minute. That's what my biggest fear would be, is something pops up at the last minute that blows the sale out of the water. And addressing the septic at the beginning is the best way to do it. Most banks require you to have the septic system looked at by a third party now. I don't know, at least they did in the Valley. I don't know if that's too common over here. I don't see that too much, but they'll have a licensed pumper go out, look at the tank, determine if it's okay or not. That's where they'll start. So usually when we get a permit in here, I got one right here on my desk for just a tank replacement, I'm guessing that property's for sale. That's just a guess, because I think about 9 out of 10 of them, if they're just replacing a tank, it means a bank has come in and said, nope, the tank's 30 years old, the pumper thought it was leaking, you have to replace it or we won't issue a loan. So they replaced the tank. Sometimes that's good or bad. It's always good to replace. Let me take that back, because it's usually an older tank that's leaking. So when you replace it, that's great. It doesn't address the drain field, but it fixes a little bit of the problem. It makes the bank happy. Those type of things pop up all the time. So if you're on top of that right away, it shouldn't affect the sale, hopefully down the road, because if they can get a guy out there, you look at the tank, it needs to be replaced. You can get a permit in 2 days and get a guy out there, hopefully within a week or so, replace it, during the closing of the property. And usually they only want to see a final approval from somebody like me, and it makes everybody happy. But again, you can always ask us to go look at different pits on the property. I don't mind doing that if we have the time. We don't have to, again, but there's nothing that says we can't. Consultants, again, these are guys, they're not licensed consultants. They're just guys that do this. They're usually soil scientists or wastewater specialists or environmental health specialists that know the soil, that know septic systems. It's something that people in my field will usually quit doing this, or when they fire me or whatever, I might do that because it's you can work on your own schedule. You know, somebody pays you $600 an hour to tell them what to do with their property, and that's not a bad deal with some of these guys. And these guys have ideas that I can't tell you because I can't direct you or guide you or do anything. These guys can, and then they can come in and argue with me. They can't fix everything, but these guys know septic systems in and out, so they can find a very reasonable solution, not always, but usually, to a difficult situation. And I recommend using them on any difficult install because they can find ideas that'll help everybody on every level. They really can. And in the end of it, if you're developing a new lot like I was, with anybody that's doing this and they don't know what they're doing, you know, paying a guy $1,200 to figure it out for you is not a bad deal. At least in my opinion, not a bad deal. But based on how much everything else is going to cost you to develop stuff over here. And so, and this is back to our entire rule book really is based on the first paragraph in our rule book. That's not a definition. It's these rules establish requirements for the construction, alteration, repair, operation, and maintenance of on-site wastewater treatment systems. And their purpose is to restore and maintain the quality of public waters and protect public health and general welfare of the people of the state of Oregon. And that is a big deal to pretty much everybody who does my job. It's about, and that's what I wanted to do, just a side note, when I got out of college, work with clean water. Sort of got into that, developed sort of this affinity that I felt that I needed to do that in some term. And this is sort of that. I kind of fell into this job, but that's kind of my philosophy. I believe that everybody has the right to clean water. And I think most people agree with that who do my job. And that some people are going to take that to the full letter of the law and some are not. And there's nothing wrong with somebody who, as long as somebody is consistent in the rules, there's nothing wrong with being more strict, I guess. I'm not going to touch on the tiny homes. That was for a different presentation. And yeah, the RV dumps we were talking about, they aren't allowed anywhere in the state to have an RV dump. You can hook to the system in some cases in a hardship dwelling or for a limited amount of time. Again, it's zoning. It's never allowed on a residence here. This was that's where I remember this. This was Jefferson. It's not here unless you have very special approval. That's Jefferson County though. You have to do it the right way. And yes, sometimes you can have an RV. But back to, let's see. And yeah, this is me trying to think of, and you guys can correct me on this, but when you're selling home, I always try to put myself in your shoes for a minute. You know, I would encourage you guys, or the future buyers, to come down to the county and pull all the records on the septic and see what's going on with it. It only takes a minute. We're happy to make copies for you. Banks, again, are going to get involved, so expect to replace any old tank when you're selling homes. It does happen almost every time, it seems. And when you start to look, you can, when you're out on the property with a potential buyer, look for signs of failure. It's in the middle of summer and hasn't rained in 30 days here, and you have weird looking stinky water in the backyard. That's probably a failing drain field. That's going to be a big red flag and a very big problem for a home sale. There's an 8-page form. It's a DEQ form these pumper trucks carry around when they evaluate the system. You may have seen them. They're available on pretty much every county's website, I think. They're helpful to have. Banks usually require, again, any sale property that's septic to have something like this filled out and have the system evaluated. They sometimes do get a little too involved. I've been told that I need a new site evaluation if my bank thinks it's too old. They don't expire. If you have an approval from 1975 on your lot that says you get a standard system, then they should still honor that unless the lot's been completely torn up or divided or something like that. The approval may change if the rules have changed. We have the right to do that. We can say, well, you can't put that type of system in there now, but we do have an approval. For me, I try to educate the homeowners on the benefits and drawbacks of septic systems. Sometimes you get properties that are right on the urban growth, right next to city limits, that you can have a septic, or you can annex the property into city limits and hook to city sewer. And there's benefits and drawbacks to both of those things. So, and again, it's not picking on them because I didn't either, but vacation homeowners and retirees often move over here and they just don't know. They don't know how to address the septic and they don't know what a well is. And that's what we're here for. Call us, bother us. That's really about the last slide. And just a couple other notes. We found over the years, and the DEQ has found that any septic treatment or additive generally is going to do more damage to your system than they help, despite what they say on TV or on the back of the box. So your septic system comes in a natural balance with what you flush down the toilet And as long as, again, you don't overload it or dump any of this other stuff in there, it's not really going to fail unless you try to make it fail. For some reason, and I don't know the answer to this, but liquid fabric softeners murder on these systems, especially the ATTs. Just don't use them ever. I don't know why. I don't know if anybody does. I know the University of Minnesota has really good research on this kind of stuff, but it just corrodes everything. It gums everything up. At all costs, do not use it. Find something else. Bleach, ammonia, and hard cleansers can kill the bacteria that's in the septic system that treats your effluent. Wax and too much bacon grease, hair products tend to create a layer at the top that can jam the system up. I've seen that before. Salons do really interesting things to septic systems. They're what we call special waste. I saw a system that was designed with 2 different ATT pods and 3 tanks that still failed because it was connected to a facility they converted to treat recovering cancer patients, and the cancer drugs they were using in the patients was killing the system. It was doing all sorts of horrible things to the septic. So just something to think about. I don't know, they're random notes that I just thought of when I was making this slide. Coffee grounds, keep them out of your system. It can damage your plumbing too. Garbage disposals can be okay. You'll hear differences on that. I don't see much wrong with them. They can't, if you overuse them, they can get into the tank and they don't break down, but it can be your tank. You can get a $40 effluent filter you stick on your tank. It collects all the waste that would go in the drain field, and the only nasty part is you have to open the lid, pull it out, spray it off once a year, and put it back in the septic tank. And most people aren't going to do that, but that can be a lifesaver for these systems. It would be required on every system if the DEQ thought people would actually maintain it. And we can't make people do that, so they're not required. But if this effluent filter, you can put them on any system, and they will make a world of difference on your system and extend the life of it possibly, forever. I'll just say that because it keeps everything except liquid out of there. And so when you do garbage disposals, when you do this type of stuff you're not supposed to do for your septic system, it can really help. And it helps with anything that gets out in the drain field. You don't want any amount of solid anything out in your drain field ever. Water softeners are really common around here due to hard water. They can create problems in the septic if I don't know if it's a cause, but I have seen problems with septic systems that have water softeners. That's all I'll say. Double check, get all the research on how they work before you put one in your system. And the other thing is, don't do all your laundry on Saturday because you can't overload your system. You have an old washing machine or a speed cleaner or something that uses a lot of water. You're just pumping water out into your septic. And really, along with everything else you're doing in the house, it can hammer that system on the weekends. It's just advice. It can cause it to do that false failure where you'll get water at the surface if you do this. Some people think it's failing. We've had, you respond to complaints. Oh, my neighbor's system is failing. Well, and then you interview the neighbor and I said, well, yeah, I do all my laundry on Saturday. You got 3 kids, we do 10 loads of laundry and it fails on Sunday. And it doesn't really fail. The water just comes to the surface for a minute and goes away. But neighbors watch each other. Sometimes they're too picky. I guess you guys probably all know that. But I hope that was informative. I hope I can answer any questions you guys have. And I'll get off this.
Yeah. We do have one question that I missed earlier, and I think it had to do with the ATT system that required the ongoing maintenance.
Yeah.
She asked if there was any idea on what those maintenance costs might look like.
It can be, that's tough. It can, if you work with these companies, it can be as little as $300 or $400 a year to as much as $750 a year. It depends on the system. It depends on the type of ATT unit. It depends on what they're doing. That's a tough question because I don't know. I've seen the bills on some of them. I've seen them. I don't know. And there's not a lot of people out there. So, I would expect to spend probably about, if I were to ballpark it, $600 or $700 a year on the maintenance of the system. That's just a guess. And I would definitely shop around and try to find somebody else if they said that to me, but if there isn't, then that's just what it is. And some of them require a little bit more maintenance. Some of the more advanced ATT systems require UV treatment, and they have to, per rule, there's going to replace the UV bulb every year. Sometimes that bulb is a couple $100. So it varies widely. But if you're faced with one, definitely shop around. Keep a list of these maintenance providers in your back pocket, hand them to your homeowner. I can't really do that unless I have a bunch of them. I have a bunch of consultant lists. That's not the same thing. We can't recommend anybody, and that's tough because we have to we'll just go Google it and figure it out. I mean, we can't show bias as a government employee, so you have to let people figure it out. But you guys can. I mean, you guys can recommend or do whatever. And the installers know too. So if you have a septic installer, they'll be able to recommend somebody. Some of the installers do their own maintenance. Maybe they'll give you a break when they do their maintenance. But yeah, it's rangy. So there's no good answer to that question, unfortunately.
The other question that had come in is, would you be willing to send me your slides so I can distribute that to the guests here?
I think so. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Okay. And I'm looking to see if there's any other, and then you said you did mention a list of consultants that you may have. And if you can send me that, I can distribute
I got it from Deschutes County too. And I think I added a couple on there, but it should be, I don't know if it's up to date or not. Todd Cleveland from Deschutes County sent it to me. So it should be, at least it gives somebody somewhere to step out and start calling people. So
I don't see any other questions in the queue at the moment, so I'll give it a second, but I want to thank you, Matt, for taking time today. This was very informative. And there's several comments coming in just saying, very informative and go Giants. So really appreciate you taking time to do that.
I'm going to put my phone number there in the panel too, and that's my cell phone. You guys I don't mind. I mean, I don't mind answering random questions at all, especially if it pertains to something in Jefferson County. I obviously should be answering a question. So give me a call if you have any questions about these things. It doesn't bother me one bit. There's also good help at the DEQ office in Bend and your local office. Todd Cleveland is a good guy at Deschutes County. I went to school with Kylie Rucker there. They're very smart, very educated, good septic regulators.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very, very much. And to everyone that's in attendance, thank you for joining. We'll send out your CE certificates by Tuesday. And yes, sounds like Matt will provide the slides. So I'll send those out when we distribute those as well next week.
Just to be clear, I don't mind staying and answering questions if people still have them. Bother me. I got time. So
they're asking for your contact, but I know he did share his cell phone in the chat. So if you scroll up, you'll find his cell phone. I can also include that information when I send out the CE certificate.
And it'll be in my email too. It should
be.
So,
yep.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. So
Awesome. I don't see any other questions coming in. So again, thank you very much, man. I think that covered it very thoroughly. Good. So appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Kevin.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day. And thank you, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Have a great week. Okay.
See you.
Bye.